Hello and welcome to the Dealing with Divorce podcast, where we bring together professionals from around Georgia to help you deal with divorce before, during, and after. Today's guest is Mike Sullivan. He's with Edward Jones, and he's a former attorney and financial advisor and new chair of the Gwinnett County Family Law section of the Bar Association. Thank you for joining us, Mike.
Thanks, Russell.
So I know I introduced you briefly, but please tell a little bit about yourself and why the folks should be listening to you.
Yeah, sure. Well, back in the day, I was a cavalry scout in the Army, so I did have some military service there. Went to Georgia State University, undergrad and law. Of course, I'm one of those guys that in law school, I did get my law degree, but I also met my future wife as well. So we met each other in law school, and we've been married 22 years. We have 3 kids, 3 girls, so I'll be working for a long time. I got one who's just accepted to University of Georgia, so she'll start in the fall. I've been working with Edward Jones now 18 years as a financial advisor, and with my legal background, of course, I love my attorneys and I love helping them out. But really, divorce is a great topic for us because we've found that a lot of people who go through these difficult times, they really need help. Obviously, they get great legal help from their attorneys and their law firms, but sometimes where to go from there. So, we want to take these pieces, help them, assist the attorneys through the process, and get them to a better place. It's a very emotional time, but we find it's very rewarding to help people through a difficult time and then get them to a better spot.
So, what does a financial advisor do? Let's kind of get before the divorce. Mm-hmm. What do you do for people before divorce?
Yeah, so, a traditional situation is folks getting closer to retirement. We always want to document financial goals, the biggest one being retirement. So we want to take a look at assets, inventory those assets, take a look at debts, take a look at those spending goals in retirement, look at sources of income. They may have sources of income through a pension, although not as many these days. We look at the different investment accounts as well. And then, of course, we run Social Security analysis as well. So those are the traditional cases and clients. Also work with small businesses, very similar things, help them eventually exit their business, and again, for retirement planning. And then, really, like I said, divorce, we started running into more and more clients who had those types of needs and realized there was just such a gap in the marketplace for folks that really specialize in those types of things. And we've found that we really do, myself and my staff, work very well with those types of people. So.
Mm-hmm. And so divorce, it's very emotionally draining. It can also be very financially complex and draining. Mm-hmm. What sort of things do you see that people do to make mistakes early in the process?
Well, I think the biggest thing, we'll talk about goals in a minute, but before we even get to that, we have to realize we're all human. And because we're human, we have emotions. Sometimes those emotions can betray us. They always say, of course, in law school, the old adage, a lawyer who represents himself has a fool for an attorney, right? Mm-hmm. When emotions are high, sometimes we make mistakes, and that's okay. So, I do find that trying to understand where they are at the moment and trying to really settle those emotions a little bit, because one of the biggest mistakes can be, and I hate to say it, Russell, and I'm sure you've had this before, and that's revenge. We're trying to get through the process, get to a better place, but if there's so much emotion there, sometimes it's hard. It may be understandable where the person is and some of the things they went through, but we've got to really fight through that. Otherwise, we could spend a lot of legal fees, fighting over pennies, and that just doesn't help anyone.
So they get emotional. Now, we're talking finances here. They're not getting emotional over the dog so much. What kind of financial things do people get emotional about?
Yeah, the biggest thing's going to be the house. Right. You've raised your children, a lot of memories in that house, and we do have to take a look now that, hey, if things are changing, does this house really fit the lifestyle that's going to be coming? Somebody has a large house that they raised kids with, okay, but now they're empty nesters. Does this really fit in with what we're trying to do? And the other thing is, remember, it can be a mortgage, There's going to be property taxes. I have a case now we're working on that, we had to have some short-term needs and free up some money just because of property taxes. We had to take care of those things. So we always have to sort of separate the emotion and say, the house meant a lot, but there may be a time where, maybe we need to downsize, to make this work. The other thing, I had a case the other day, a few weeks ago, and we, he had classic cars, and he also had retirement accounts. And we had to look at those different assets, and we'll talk about retirement accounts later, but we had to look at those. And of course, the classic cars, as you can imagine, were things that were near and dear to the gentleman. But we did have to come to Jesus moment to say, it's going to make a lot more sense to liquidate some of those cars than it will be to blow up an IRA where there's going to be a lot of taxes and really hurt him in retirement.
And so do you work directly with the person or with the attorney or both?
Really all of the above. What I always say is the earlier that I can get involved, the better. We can take a look and see what the assets are. One of the biggest mistakes I see with both attorneys and clients is treating assets all the same. And what I mean by that is, someone can have a stock account or a mutual fund account that's non-qualified. And what I mean by non-qualified, it's just not in an IRA. It's not in a 401k. It's not in a 403b or any of those fancy numbers. It's just an investment account, a brokerage account. And for that, any sale of those assets, there would be a capital gain and therefore capital gains tax. And that's not too bad, but if you shift over into an IRA, a 401k, things like that, those assets have never been taxed. So we call those tax deferred assets, meaning you didn't pay taxes yet, but you will. The issue there is if you treat those the same, someone ends up with an IRA, let's say it's $500,000, well, they don't really have $500,000 because when they pull money out, they're going to have to pay ordinary income tax on the entire amount they pull out, and that can be pretty sizable. So we want to be very, very careful about those types of assets. Another case we had, annuities. Annuities can be very complex. They're not for everybody. Sometimes clients come, they've already purchased these annuities through a bank or whatever it is, and so they want to hang on to them or they want to slice and dice them. The thing you have to realize about annuities, very similar to CDs, is if we do exit them early, there could be a sizable penalty. I was running into a gentleman who had bought some annuities through a bank, had about $500,000 in annuities. He was going to pay an 8% penalty just to get out of those annuities, and I was not a big fan of that, so we had to look for other assets.
That's a good example. Are there any other examples of client coming in thinking they had one legal strategy and then after talking to you came out with a different legal strategy?
Yeah, I think a recent case that we had a couple, and we do work with a lot of people from the federal government, IRS people, Veterans Affairs, VA office, things like that. And so many times with federal government, they still do have a pension. They still have a pension amount that's eligible in retirement. And they also have an investment account. Many times it's called the TSP plan. That's a thrift savings plan. That's just the federal government's version of a 401k. And so, the spouse had really locked in and said, geez, that a piece of that pension would be very helpful for her retirement. And so I looked at that, we looked at the numbers, and what we did is we ran a life expectancy chart to see, how many payments, she might get. And then we looked at, okay, if we took lump sums from the TSP plan instead, well, we could grow that, and of course she would have control of the TSP, or at least we would roll that to an IRA. We would be able to grow that. She'd have more control over that asset, and in the long run, it actually made more sense to take a portion of the TSP plan and forego the pension. In other words, let the husband have the pension, but she would have a lump sum that would come out of the TSP plan. Mm-hmm. So that was a very effective strategy. Just gives her more options down the line.
All right, I'm going to go through kind of some characters, some potential clients' assets, and tell me if this is a kind of a client that would need a financial advisor. I'm
Sure.
going to go kind of from up to down.
Okay.
And if someone had like $1 million in retirement and $1 million house and making $250,000 a year, do they need a financial advisor?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's a typical client that I would have. Okay, most wealthy people do have a financial advisor because they don't want to make mistakes. Number one, they want to grow their money in an efficient way. They also want to save on taxes. When you have those types of assets, we always kind of jokingly say, we're going to grow your money, but also make sure you keep more of your own money. Okay, so we always want to take a look at different tax treatments. We want to look at different strategies. There's different strategies for Social Security, so we run those analysis. Does it make sense to take it at age 62? Does it make sense to take it at 70? A lot of times spouses, if someone was a working, a stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home dad, they were not putting money into Social Security. Well, they're going to be eligible for half of their spouse's Social Security as long as they're married 10 years or longer. They can get half of the spouse's Social Security. It doesn't affect the ex-spouse. Okay, so those are things there. You'd also be surprised, Russell. There's a lot of folks I work with. Of course, I do work with some attorneys as well, individually. And people don't always know what they own. They've been putting money into these accounts. They purchased an annuity at a bank. They have a CD out there. They've got some potential inheritance. They've never really put their hands on these things. They really don't know exactly what it is. So one of my favorite things to do is simply take inventory. What do we have to work with? And let's describe it. I always like to ask a client, do you know anything about the IRA? Do you know anything about a Roth IRA? Yeah, a lot of times they say, yeah, a little bit. Okay, great. Well, let's talk a little bit about it. And so I start to describe the difference between the pre-tax, after-tax assets, things like that. We talk about the taxation. The other thing that we want to look at too is, does this make sense for this client? If a husband was, 10 years older, very close to retirement, well, if I'm managing those accounts, we're going to get more conservative once we get closer to retirement because that makes sense. They're going to need access to that money. We don't want to take huge fluctuations. Let's say a wife, though, had a 65-year-old husband and a 55-year-old wife. Well, that wife may be working for a little while. So we want to change the allocations of those investments.
And customize it.
To fit that person and now these new needs that maybe she may be working for 10 years. Okay, fine. Then let's get a more of a growth focus and be a little bit more on the growth side and less conservative because we want to grow, right? So, that's a typical client. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, those people definitely are eligible for a financial advisor.
So let's kind of work down the line and chop off zeros. What's a $100,000 retirement, $100,000 equity in the house, and a $100,000 a year job?
Yeah, so it sounds like an accumulator. Okay, that's a person that's probably not going to be ready for retirement for a while. So a strategy there is again, and many times the first thing I want to do is back up. We want to set goals. Okay, so everyone, we want to have goals. And really most people should have a few financial goals. The long-term goal, of course, and in my industry, I think we do a very good job in our industry of financial planning for retirement. That's the big one. Retirement's the big one, but it's not the only one. When it comes to divorce, we've got to speed up a little bit and say we've got short-term needs. We may have credit card debt. How are we going to attack that credit card debt? How are we going to free that up? Are we going to make minimum payments on some of the credit cards so that we can eliminate, one by one? And of course, Dave Ramsey would call it the, a debt snowball, right? So there's two ways to do that. Of course, there's kind of the Dave Ramsey approach, and then there's a Clark Howard approach. Clark Howard likes to go after the highest interest first. Okay,
the mathematical answer.
Dave Ramsey says get rid of the smallest debt first and keep going. I'm a Ramsey kind of guy just because I want to see momentum. Yeah. If we got a $1,000 credit card, $5,000 credit card, $10,000 credit card, let's eliminate the 1,000. Now you just freed up more money, and that's going to go into the 5,000. Let's gang up on that one, and then we're going to use those payments to go after the 10,000.
Yeah, because I agree. There's a lot more psychologically there than just mathematical. People's minds aren't mathematical; they're emotional.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So debt cleanup is a big one for that type of client probably. Emergency money, that's another piece that's a short-term need. A lot of financial advisors, that bores us. We stick it in a money market account and say, so what? But that's extremely important to a client who may have property taxes, who may need 4 new tires, who may, well, sometimes air conditioning goes out. And that's a joke because the air conditioning is struggling here in the building. But so there are short-term needs that we've got to resolve, and usually those are going to come first because we want to make sure that the client gets a good start to their new life. So it's all about those goals, short-term goals, then looking at the long-term goals. But yeah, sometimes we've got to get through some of those short-term things. Legal fees, obviously, we've got to pay our attorneys, things like that. So I think that, like I said, that client could absolutely still use financial advice.
So, I guess one of the basic needs is shelter and figuring out who's going to live where.
Yeah.
If a party wants to keep a house that was formerly, for 2 people, how can you figure out if they can afford that house on their own?
Yeah, so again, it's going to go back to our goals. What kind of spending goals do we have? What kind of budget do we have? We've got to work with that first and then backtrack. And sometimes we do have to be realistic about it. I've got a case coming up now. My staff and I just talked about it. We're reviewing the numbers, reviewing the accounts. And we are going to have that come to Jesus moment of, hey, they've been living really well, living on a boat, doing some things. They've got another house, but money's starting to get a little tight. And so I do think something's going to have to give there. And it may be the sale of that house to downsize that. So sometimes that has to happen. But it starts with the goals. We've got to be honest about it. And I think that's where a good financial advisor can say, hey, I understand the house means a lot to you. Kids have grown up there. You've had so many great memories. But at the same time, if the numbers don't work, they don't work. And then we have to make those adjustments. And just like a good attorney that sometimes, I'm sure, Russell, you have to give some tough legal advice at times. It's the same thing with a financial advisor. It's to say, what, let's look at this. It is what it is. These are the numbers. And, I can, run projections and say, okay, if we continue on this path, this is where we are. We run out of money at age 80, whatever that is, there's a shortfall. And I know people don't want to do that. So, we usually take people to at least age 90 in retirement and say, does this plan work, right? So we want to really just show numbers don't lie. Numbers don't lie. So again, it's just about the needs. Usually though, we try to at least work and say, okay, what is your intention? Do you want to stay in the house? Do you not? Does a spouse want the house? Where are we at? Can we come to the amicable agreement? Obviously, working with the attorneys, and if so, then try to make it work. But yeah, many times, it is a downsizing situation, and that's okay. We can certainly we can do that.
And what kind of numbers? How do you tell if someone, based on their income, can afford a house? Or I know, like you mentioned there, that a little bit earlier, that if you've been married for 10 years, that you can get a share of the other person's Social Security. Are there any other kind of things that can help make the process easier to be able to, for the person who maybe doesn't have the money initially to be able to afford the house, to be able to make it work with the banks and everything?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's going to be the liquid assets because, the first thing we got to have is a down payment, right? So we've got to look and see what the lenders are requiring at that time. What kind of down payment do we have, and then what kind of mortgage payment? I always want to include principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, PITI, and see if that does fit within the budget. The other thing is, and it's not always, my favorite place to go, but sometimes it's necessary, is, let's say somebody does have that house, maybe they can afford the mortgage, but it's going to be tight, is renting, right? Many times there's a basement. Hey, we used it for the kids. We no longer need it anymore. Does this make sense now to furnish this as an apartment? And it may not be a forever strategy, but maybe a few years.
Oh, and that can help with the bank to have a renter in there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. To have a renter to either qualify or at the very least offset some of the costs along the way. So I do have some people that will rent a portion of their house out for maybe a few years, something like that. Maybe it's a friend or a relative who they can help, but that can help offset some of their costs, right? And again, not a perfect situation, but maybe just temporary, right?
You spoke a little bit earlier about liquidity and how some things it's easier to sell to use the cash, and also about tax consequences. With like getting or penalties with retirement. Are there any kind of circumstances where it might be more advantageous to have more of a tax deferred account with the or like long-term retirement account as opposed to something liquid, or is it always better to have the liquid?
Well, it's some of both, right? The thing about the IRAs and the 401ks, they're designed to be more long-term, okay? So if they're already in there, we can avoid touching those. I'd much rather avoid touching those. We pay a lot in taxes, sometimes even penalties, depending. And so those things, I love not to touch them. The downside is, with corporate America and the way our tax structure is, a lot of what I call worker bees, and that just means folks who have been in the corporate world a long time, it could be 95% of their liquid assets are in pre-tax accounts, otherwise known as 401ks and IRAs. So that's all we have to work with, and if that's the case, well, it is what it is. But when it comes to the short-term needs, that's why it's important to have some non-qualified assets. So we can liquidate, we take a capital gain tax on those assets, but they're a little bit more accessible. So, I love like I said, when I work with my clients, I always make sure, we've got pre-tax money. We want to take advantage of those tax benefits. We want to grow for long term, but it's also good to have a pot of money on the other side. It's just free and clear of penalties, a little bit of capital gains tax, but shouldn't kill you. And again, we can get to that very quickly.
Going back to what we were talking about before, let's cut off another zero. Let's say someone only has $10,000 in the bank. They don't own a home. They're just renting. They're trying to save up money for a down payment. All they've got basically is an emergency fund. Do they need a financial advisor?
So that's a situation where a one-time consultation. Honestly, I don't really charge anything for that because I always try to do help people out when I can. I find that good things always come around when you help people. But that might be a one-time consultation of just saying, here's the pieces, here's the game plan for where you're going to go. If you save this amount of money and you do it this way, then you'll be able to do that. And many times there can be some online brokerages and things like that that can help out. They can get them started. And then once they get more, accumulation, then they may be in a place where, a full-time financial advisor may be needed. But, those people, debt counseling, that's a huge one. Like you said, emergency savings, and even just starting a small retirement account. Because you'd be surprised with the snowball if we keep investing, how that can really grow.
Yeah, I bet you probably it's a pretty good accountability thing to have somebody on your team too, just to keep you accountable, to check in with you every now. How often do you meet with clients?
Yeah, so a typical client for us, we like to meet semi-annual face-to-face. Now, if that can't happen, the only blessing of COVID was the discovery of Zoom. So we relied on Zoom, and you'd be surprised, many of my seniors, who many people would say, aren't as tech savvy, it's quite the opposite. During COVID, they became very accustomed to Zoom, whether it would be church groups, civic groups, catching up with friends and family. So a lot of our seniors actually don't mind Zoom. They're comfortable with it, and of course they don't have to commute, to Gwinnett County. So that's one of the blessings. But so semi-annual reviews. I also like to do quarterly calls for my clients as well. Sometimes right now I will check in. I like to, number one, see if anything's on their mind. I call that a vaccination from the media, okay? Media vaccination. Reason being is the media is going to talk to us probably 100 times a day through cell phones, cable news, social media, things like that. And of course, as we know, bad news sells. So the media likes to always, focus on the crises or the crisis at hand, where I started to give them a little bit more of a long-term projection. Yes, the market's down. The good news is here's we are now, and these cycles will run. I don't want to mess with any of your investments right now. But it's always good to hear from them. Plus, remember, their goals can change. We didn't see it before, but you know what? Now we need a new car. Okay, that car's no good. We've got to do something. Okay, well, let's find out where we're going to take that money. Does it make sense to finance, pay cash, maybe some of both? What's changed? Other things that change in people's lives, whether it's adding children. We got a baby on the way. Okay, good to know. What do we need to do? Do we need a college savings plan? Something like that. Unfortunately, in my industry, I do work with a lot of senior citizens, and unfortunately, death is a natural part of life. Probably have a client pass away once a month these days. So we have to work with the family on that. Obviously get beneficiaries scheduled, get the assets dispersed. Maybe it's taking care of a spouse who is no longer, if one spouse is down, that's one loss of Social Security. So, we've got a plan for that as well. And obviously redo beneficiaries, things like that. So change of life things can happen. Retirement, it's a great one. We love to celebrate that. But sometimes I just had a client the other day. She got to the point, as Dave Ramsey would say, she got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so she put in her 2-week notice after we did some financial planning. And she found out she was in very good shape. And so she's happy. I think she's got a few more days left and she'll be retired. So that's a great one. Inheritance is another one. I get the client that maybe have $500,000 and they're doing okay, they're accumulating. Well, suddenly they're multimillionaires because, unfortunately, parents did pass away. It came at a huge price. And I've had those clients come to me and say, Mike, we need a big boy and big girl plan now. We've got real money here. We can't screw this up. So again, that's where we're able to step in and say, great, why don't we come in and we'll take a look at what we've got and make some goals.
What are some less common, but not uncommon, financial assets? Like, for example, stock options. How do you deal with some of those less common financial assets?
Yeah, so a lot of those are going to be working with the HR or whoever's handling some of those stock options. If it's private equity, it can get very sticky there, right? If it's not publicly traded, so we always got to work with their program to see what is eligible, and if so, a lot of those stock options they can have a vesting schedule, and that just means you got the stock, but you got to wait 3 years before it's eligible to really move, sell, liquidate, anything like that. So they're all different. So the answer there, and I know it's a lawyer's favorite answer to everything, which is
it depends.
It depends. But yeah, we've got to kick the tires and look under the hood, see what's out there. I just recently got a SEPA license, which is a certified exit planning advisor, and that's just a little more in depth for business owners, how to exit their business, whether it's a sale of a business, a merger and acquisition, some type of inter-family transfer, could be an employee buyout. Okay, so there's a lot of different options there. But I think with those little bit higher level education and strategies, we can actually look at a small business, try to evaluate it. With a small business, I'm a big believer in getting it appraised, right? So if we're looking at that business, let's get a professional. Let's get a professional to look at the books. Let's see what price tag on this business is. A lot of small business owners, they've worked really hard. They've very proud of their business. Sometimes they can overprice their business and say, on the open market, it may not sell for what you think. The opposite can be true. I've had clients that discount their businesses. They'll say something like, geez, if I was no longer involved, the business would collapse. And then we get an expert in to say, no, if you put a little bit of time in with 3 years and these types of strategies, you could slowly exit yourself as a key component of that business, and now you can sell the business. So There's definitely ways. A good appraiser can actually give good strategies to build up the value of small businesses. So I never want to make sweeping assumptions. It's just like a house. You know, if we're going to sell a house, how much is it worth? Mm-hmm. You know, let's take a look at that. I would say another thing that we work with, there's going to be two things there too. We've talked a little bit about annuities. Again, I don't do a ton of annuities, what I do, but I do run into them as people have them. And I always encourage them. You know, you can always send those to me. We'll take a look at them. We do classes all year long on annuities. Annuities are always changing. So there's different types of annuities. I always tell people, if you don't understand your annuity, you're exactly right. They're very confusing. There's cash value, there's income benefits, there's riders, there's fees, there's penalties, there's a lot of things. So we always want to know the ins and outs. Like I said about that gentleman, if he had liquidated his $500,000, you know, he would have taken an 8% penalty. So let's see, what 10% of 500 would be 50,000. So maybe it would be about 40. So that'd be a $40,000 penalty mm-hmm. he'd be taking to liquidate those assets instead of, you know, liquidating some other things. Mm-hmm. So that was huge. Another case I had, a woman had about $2 million of whole life insurance. She didn't even know she had it on her. She was a homemaker. I certainly questioned the strategy there, but I can't guess at what the ex-husband or the insurance salesman was thinking there. But what we were able to do upon divorce is we took the $2 million and a lot of cash value. We were able to move that into a policy for the ex-wife. We got her $1 million policy where she also had $1 million of long-term care. So should she ever need long-term care in the future, she has $1 million of long-term mm-hmm. care coverage. If she doesn't, well, she'll throw another $1 million onto her estate. And if you don't know already, Russell, the proceeds from life insurance are always going to be tax-free.
Okay.
Always going to be tax-free, so that's a benefit too. So yeah, different life insurance and annuities can be confusing. That's why it's always good to get a professional involved to say, you know, this is what we're looking at.
Now, does a divorce change the beneficiaries automatically? What happens?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. So no. That's one of the biggest mistakes I see whenever there's a divorce happening. Again, we want to get involved. Let's look at because all the accounts have to change. IRAs, Roth IRAs, non-qualifieds, checking accounts.
I mean, I'm just imagining an ex-wife or ex-spouse getting life insurance from their former spouse. It's like, whoa, you got to watch out for that.
It would be a big one. I would say so. There's mistakes that the clients make. There's mistakes that financial advisors make. So the clients, we've got to make sure all those beneficiaries are properly updated. At the bank, they call it a POD, not a TOD, payment on death. But you can do that at the bank. It's just a form. It's pretty easy. We want to do that for the IRAs, 401ks, any of those assets out there. But the other thing that we want to do is many times they have life insurance. It may not be through the financial advisor. They may have purchased it online, another insurance agent, whatever. We've got to take that inventory. And a good financial advisor, even if we can't personally change it, we can facilitate that, right? We can make a three-way call. We can make a three-way appointment. Hey, Mr. Insurance Agent, Mrs. Insurance Agent, we've got a mutual client. She has some insurance through you. We've got to get these beneficiaries. Same thing with annuities. If you have an annuity that's going to be in a non-qualified account, the financial advisor can change the form at the financial firm. That's no problem. The problem is the annuity has its own form. So if it's with, an insurance carrier, you've got to go through them and make sure that they've got the proper forms executed. Because if it's just the firm itself, that won't be good enough.
And so what kind of accounts have beneficiaries? All accounts?
Yeah, so we typically don't do any accounts without beneficiaries. We want to do, obviously, you can't have a joint account with an IRA. An IRA stands for individual retirement account. So you can't have a joint account, but you can have beneficiaries, as many as you want. Same thing with the 401ks. On the non-qualified side, you can have a joint account. So in Georgia, we call it joint tenancy right of survivorship. And of course, you're familiar with that. And so a lot of times we'll have a joint account. If one spouse passes away, the other gets it. Okay, and those would be accounts, obviously, depending on the settlement with the attorneys. We're going to split those accounts and make those individual. And you can have backup beneficiaries on that type of account. So, a classic example is what happens with, a couple that unfortunately, they get in an accident on vacation and they pass away, both of them. Well, if we have beneficiaries on those accounts, then it'll follow. Okay, so there are times where it's good to have those beneficiaries too, but they all need to be changed, all need to be reviewed, especially life insurance and annuities, CDs with banks. Those things can slip under the radar, and we can leave a lot of money on the table. Like I said, that would be rough.
But there's no beneficiary with real estate, but what you mentioned a minute ago with right of survivorship, that kind of almost acts kind of like beneficiary. But what would be the advantages and disadvantages of someone having, say, after a divorce, putting their child with a right of survivorship on the title, as opposed to keeping it in their name and then having the house transferred to their child upon death? Like, are there tax consequences and advantages one way or the other?
Yeah, so, if we end up doing the joint, there's a couple things. One is we got to be careful. I see this a lot. I see some senior citizens, they want to make things easy for their children. And so there's always an alpha child. There's always one that sort of takes care of mom or dad, really good with their own finances. A lot of times they're local. A lot of times they're the oldest, seems to be the case, but not always. And so I've seen it where the client, many times it could be the female because they tend to live longer. So it could be a widowed mom, and she says, look, I want to put my alpha son as joint. And then when I'm gone, it'll be his, and then he can liquidate and disperse that amongst his siblings. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I can assure you at least one of those siblings is probably struggling financially. And they're going to show up at the funeral wondering where their money is. Okay? So we don't want to put that in there. The other thing is there can be a gift tax issue because now the son inherits that whole thing. Now they've got to distribute, and it gets a little more complicated from there. The other thing, and this happens with non-qualified assets when we talk about capital gains tax. Here's an example. Let's say mom has Home Depot stock. Let's say she purchased it for $100,000, and many years later, it's now worth $500,000. If she liquidates that during her lifetime, well, that's a $400,000 gain. 15% of $400,000 is a whole lot of money. That's capital gains tax. Same scenario. Mom purchases it at $100,000. It's up to $500,000 now. She passes away. She leaves that to her kids. They sell it the same day. I hope they don't. But if they did for $500,000, the cost basis has now stepped up. That's a fancy word for saying there's no capital gains tax.
That's $60,000 saved.
That's like a lot of saved. Now, I've also seen a strategy, and this is a more complex strategy. Got to find the right person on this. But I had a strategy where the son, and it was a one-child family. Okay, the mom is widowed. Okay, and you have one son. He has worked up $500,000 in company stock. Tons of capital gains tax, okay, if he sells it. What he did was gift it to his elderly mother, okay? Gifted it her.
Say that one more time.
So he has company stock, and because of the growth of it, he would be looking at a very similar situation. Maybe he paid $100, now it's worth $500. There was about $400,000 in capital gains tax for him. But instead of selling it, he gifts it over to his elderly mother. Okay, she takes it. They avoid the gift tax because they take it out of the lifetime gifting. Okay, so didn't pay any gift tax.
And that's like millions, right? The gift tax number.
Right now it's about 14 million
14
a
million.
piece.
So you got to be significant for the gifts to be a big deal.
Unfortunately for them, not a problem.
Yeah.
So, so he gifts it over to the mom. Okay. Mom passes away. Okay. Now he sells it. And remember,
With the step
up in basis.
Wow.
That's a huge savings. Got to have the right client.
Got to trust your mom.
Got to trust your mom. Got to keep her offline. And there's probably a topic at some point as far as the senior fraud right now is we're seeing a lot of that right now. But keep her offline. Keep her away from cyber boyfriends. Yeah.
Wow, that's really a creative strategy. Did you come up with that, or he came up with that?
That's an oldie but a goodie.
Oh, okay, good. Very neat.
Good enough to borrow.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
What other common mistakes do you see people make, or what do you tell attorneys that surprises attorneys, where you're actually educating the lawyers of?
Yeah, so the biggest one, I think we covered, but it's worth covering again, and it's going to be the IRAs, the 401ks, pre-tax money. It's a huge amount of taxes they're going to have to be paid on those accounts. Roth IRAs, remember, Roth IRAs are going to be tax-free. So as we pull money out, the principal's already been taxed. So now the growth is tax-free. So always remember that. Non-qualified accounts, again, got to pay capital gains. Usually not the end of the world unless it's an old holding. So those are some of those things that we look at. The other thing is going to be pensions versus liquid assets. So it's always good to run projections. Where do we come out ahead? Many times I like the liquid assets. It's just more for us to work with. And a pension, the federal government, we feel pretty good. They're not going to run out of money, but pensions are only as good as the issuer. So remember, what's good today, 10, 20 years from now, a pension company could be insolvent. Mm-hmm. That could be a major problem. So sometimes taking the lump sum now, makes a lot more sense. So those are some of those things I think that we look at. But I think, like I said, it's going to be the non-qualified assets versus the qualified assets. I think that's one of the biggest things that we run into. I think that's going to be it.
All right. Well, if somebody wanted to use your services, how would they reach you?
Yeah, they can certainly reach out. My email is mike.j.sullivan@edwardjones.com. Phone number 770-962-2289. That's our Lawrenceville branch. And my assistants, Katie and Tara, are very, very helpful. So always willing to say hi and get to know you.
All right. Well, we'll give a link to that in the description. And thank you for joining us for the Dealing with Divorce podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.